Despite some early spring rains, the drought is affecting our water supply and also having an impact on the choices we make when it comes to our outdoor watering habits. So we brought in 3 experts today who are professionals in their field of landscaping and irrigation, so we could ask them all the questions that you guys have been posing to us. We are very fortunate to have Andy Veach down there at the end. He is the owner of Lawn Sprinkler Services. Seated next to him is Tim McDonald with the Kansas Forest Service, and seated next to me is Marty Johnson, the owner of Johnson's Garden Center. Gentlemen, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Well, Andy, maybe you could start off and tell us a little bit more about yourself.
I started Lawn Sprinkler Services about 11 years ago. I have 20 years in the irrigation business, and we do all kinds of design, consulting, and lots of service repairing and keeping older systems up and running.
Great. Tim?
I'm with the Community Forestry Coordinator with the Kansas Forest Service. I've been in the industry for about 30 years and I've worked mainly with municipalities and their tree programs.
Okay, and Marty?
We have Johnson's Garden Center, and third generation in the nursery plant business, and love plants. It's one of my passions, and like to see what people can do with them. So that's my history.
All right, well, thank you all for volunteering so much. We really appreciate being able to tap into your expertise. Maybe you guys could tell us a little bit in the beginning about what you guys have noticed as far as the drought and how it's impacted the average homeowner resident.
Probably the biggest thing I've seen is that initially when trees showed a lot of the drought stress was from what I would call marginal trees that weren't established very well. They had poor root systems, or maybe people did overwater and caused the plant to not root down very deeply. So those marginal trees were the first ones to go. Now I'm actually starting to see some more of the mature trees. People thought the mature trees would come through just fine. And actually after the last 2 years, I think even the mature trees needed some supplemental through this drought.
Well, and let's talk about that for a little bit. I know one of the things you guys have shared with me is that you need to understand what type of soil you have in order to make some good decisions about watering. So will you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. You know, with the soils, I mean, we've got sandy soil down south. You've got kind of a clay loam out west and a lot of clays on the east side. And each one of those soils kind of drinks the water differently. Sand is really quick, clay is really slow. And you know, if a customer would aerate their yard, that would help that water soak in better instead of just running off.
You know, I don't think it takes maybe a rocket scientist to figure out what type of soil they have. What I've done is kind of experimental. I'll cut my irrigation timing back or put less water on it and just see what that turf looks like. I've got some areas where it will dry out a little bit more just because that soil may be different in that area. Maybe it's from construction, and back years ago that area was filled with a different type of soil than the land normally would have. So just kind of trial and error, I think, is a great way. I mean, you don't have to, you know, probe every area, but you can just see when you cut back the irrigation. I mean, that's what I've done, is just the areas that start to dry up more, I'll adjust the watering accordingly. If you're confused, is there a place where you can have your soils tested if you need some extra help?
Oh, absolutely. The Extension Center, you can take them out there and they'll do, they can tell you what basic type soils you have, and then they'll tell you what the fertilizer content in there is for nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, which, again, if you get those things right, and pHs, if you get those things right, your plants are going to be healthier and probably come through a drought situation a lot better.
Mm-hmm. I know that there are different types of grass. Would you talk about those a little bit, and which ones are maybe more drought tolerant than others?
Of course, the warm season grasses, Bermuda grass, zoysia, and buffalo grass are grasses that love or do better in the heat of the summer, tend to be more drought tolerant than what our cool season lawns like fescue and bluegrass would be.
And so does that impact how much water you should put down on each type of grass, and how much would you recommend?
The warm season grasses are going to require less water to have a real good looking green lush lawn than what the cool season lawn is. We were talking before this started about how much water to put on a lawn, how long to run the irrigation system, and you know, every lawn is so different. Like we were talking, the soil structure in the different areas, so it's, you know, it depends on what type of sprinkler heads you're going to be using, and just how much wind you've got. So to say you can run your irrigation, or you can give a lawn 1 inch of water a week, which is kind of the recommended amount, that may or may not be true depending on on the particular site. And Andy's an expert on how long to run those irrigation systems.
Well, Marty, you hit it right on the head. Every yard is so different, and you know, it's not just how much you put down, it's how healthy is your yard, how well is it fertilized, how compacted is that soil. And you know, a lot of those things can dramatically impact the amount of water. If your soil absorbs the water quickly because it's healthy, you have to put down less because that water is going to absorb in instead of just running off. You know, we have some rules of thumb, you know, about spray heads, maybe, you know, 6 to 10 minutes, and rotors, you know, 12 to 20. But each yard's different, and when that system runs, you need to go out there and look at it and say, okay, wow, look how much it's running off, or boy, I've had this thing on 15 minutes and it's still dry out here. And if that is the case, if you still see some dramatic dry spots, you need to look at the coverage of your yard and make sure that everything is getting covered evenly. As another big problem we see in sprinklers is if the heads are not set evenly, then you got to water one area real heavy to get enough water in another area. So again, there's so many variables, it's hard to just say, oh, here's the pill.
So how do you adjust your sprinkler heads to make sure that they run evenly? Is that something that's easy to do, or do you need a professional to help you?
I think you should start out doing it yourself, just at least, you know, walking around your yard and taking a common sense look at it. And if you see some areas that are obviously dry and you can't easily fix them, give a professional a call and have him come out and take a look at it, and maybe they can do some changes to it.
Mm-hmm. So should people even be watering at this point? I mean, I know we've had some nice spring rains. Is now the time, or should they wait?
I personally have turned my system on once, and if I'd have waited one more day, we'd have got rain and I hadn't had to turn it on at all. So at this point, no, I don't think anyone's needed water unless it's a brand newly established yard, or maybe some annuals in a shrub bed, but across the board, probably not.
Yeah, I agree with Andy. I think I have not watered my turf yet. I've watered newly planted shrubs and trees a little bit, and I've watered my complete garden once. I've hand watered a few sections, but I've completely watered it just once. So yeah, I think people that were using it now, and considering the situation that we're in, it's kind of upsetting to me that they're even running their systems right now. Because now again, if you're making that soil so damp, you're causing the roots to not grow to a certain depth or depth that would help some of the drought tolerance down the way. Now is when you kind of want to start stressing things a little bit. So down the road, you're working with deeper roots to begin with when we do come into the hotter, drier times.
You just can't say that you need exactly this much. That's why, like we were talking earlier, you know, I haven't turned my irrigation system on at all. I was getting ready to. There were some spots where this week it was dry. With that rain last night, it perked back up. So I've bought myself a little bit of time. So it's impossible to say.
You mentioned new landscaping. How much water does new landscaping, plants and shrubs, versus plants that are maybe a year or older?
Yeah, good question, because that plant's going to come with the root ball, and all the roots are right there. And until it gets established and sends out roots, that area needs to be kept moist. And of course, by mulching around that plant, it's going to retain that moisture. So as far as how much or how often, just watch how the top of the plant looks. If we get regular rains, that helps. But that root ball does need to be kept moist. That whole bed area doesn't have to be kept wet. Like I say, drip irrigation or just hand watering just each individual shrub is going to not require that much water.
So it's more of a practice of eyeballing it to make sure it's looking moist?
Eyeballing, yeah, looking at the plant. When it starts to wilt, it's telling you generally that it's dry, although overwatering a plant robs the roots of oxygen, which will also make it wilt. Use your finger, scratch that in there. If it's dry, it's thirsty.
Then time to
water it.
Watering is the toughest thing to explain to somebody. And Marty's exactly right. You can go into what we call a wet wilt, which is something that's too wet, and then you can go into a dry wilt. And I usually encourage when they call, I say water it, and if it gets worse, it was probably a wet wilt. You've been watering too much. If it does, the plant perks up, then it's a dry wilt, and it needed water.
Same thing with trees, or?
Well, this time of year, I mean, when you do plant a 2-gallon shrub, and you probably need once a week would probably be adequate in the spring. In the summer, it may need it twice a week. But again, just if you've just planted a few new shrubs, just water those shrubs. You don't need to water the whole existing landscape. Just concentrate on what you've planted at that time. There is no really rule of thumb. Now, if you plant a bald and burlap tree that comes with the soil that's with it, that's going to dry out not quite as quick as if you bought one in a container. A container, as Marty said, they're very confined root system, and they're in a very porous soil that the water just filtrates out a lot better. So a container tree might need a little bit more water than a bald and burlap tree.
Plus you can, depending on the type of a plant, if you plant a hydrangea right now, put it outside, it's in a sunny spot, water it real good and it's moist, I can guarantee you on a hot sunny day it's going to be wilting down. It doesn't need more water, but tonight at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, that plant's going to perk back up and be just fine. So again, examine the soil and see how wet it actually is and until it gets established. And some of those plants might take a year or two before they send out enough roots where it can take up enough water.
Well, and two, sprinkler systems are broken up into stations. So instead of just turning it on and running the whole thing, if you do have some new plant material, water just the shrub bed, or go out and hit the shrubs that need it with a garden hose and leave the rest of the system off. There's a lot of controls on those systems that make the systems much more flexible than they're often used. If you just have one area, maybe you have a real sunny station in your yard, water only that one. And that way you can save the water for later. You made a good point about, back it off. It starts wilting a little bit, okay, add a little more water to it.
Well, I think one mistake people make too is they set their irrigation system in the spring to run X number of minutes and think that is set for the whole year. It may need some more water than that, but this year, like I said, we've all talked about, we probably haven't had to water at all, so maybe get it set initially, but then wait until it does need water, not 10 or 15 minutes a zone, for every day, so just kind of water. My lawn, I typically, unless it's a really drought situation, I'll run it manually. I'll water it for whatever the zones require, and then don't let it run every day. When it starts to tell me it's thirsty again, I'll run it again.
And when they're talking about it telling you that it's thirsty, you see, like in the tall fescues, you'll see where it gets kind of that shaded color or that blue-gray, green color, and then that's when the turf grass is first going under stress. If you're home and around or not on vacation, leave the thing on manual, and then when you see that drought stress, then turn it on for a little bit, and then shut it back off or leave it on manual. When you go away on vacation, I think is when you should use your automatic. Everything's set record, and that's what automatic is for when you're not around.
Yeah.
Well, I know people, when they see their grass start to look like it's under stress, they probably start to freak out a little bit. So then how much would you recommend they water, for how long, and how do you measure how much water it's getting? I mean, what advice do you have for people so they don't go overboard when they see their yard start showing stress?
Tuna can.
Yeah, tuna can. I was thinking that same thing. I mean, if you've got a zone that you want to find out how much it waters, put 3 or 4 tuna cans out in different areas, and then turn that station on, run it for 10 minutes, and then go measure each one of your tuna cans. If you had 5 of them, divide your answer by 5, and that's your average, and that's how you can figure out how long to run.
And that also tells you, and you can tell you how well your sprinkler system is working. Are the cans even?
Right.
Is it getting even coverage? But in answer to your question, like Marty said, if you just have that, maybe run that one zone. If the rest of your lawn is shaded by trees, it might not need it. Maybe that's the sunny spot of the yard. Just run the one zone.
Yeah, that's good with that blue, the bluish look of the grass. If you just get one area that's that way, water only that one zone that night, and then see how long it takes the rest of it to start blowing up.
Is it better to water at certain times of the day or night, or what do you guys recommend?
Fescue's really needed in the morning versus evening. But again, middle of the afternoon doesn't matter how the grass looks, just wait till it cools off.
My irrigation, when it's set automatically, it comes on early in the morning, right at about sun up. And then there's less evaporation at that time, less chance for disease. If you water at night, the grass blade or the grass plants stay wet, it's hot, you're going to have some disease problems. So myself, I water early in the morning. There's very little evaporation at that time, and it seems to work for me. It's great to turn that on in the afternoon when it's 100 degrees out because it cools everything down, but you're not getting good efficient use of the water for the plants.
I know last year it was a pretty dramatic stop to the hot weather, and we got some 70-degree days right there. And because most of the sprinkler systems kept running, we were getting calls and people were saying, "Hey, I got a flood here, I've got a leak. What are you watering?" You know, and they tell me every day, and then, okay, well, it's so cool now that you're having flooding issues. So be very cognizant of that and turn off your sprinkler when it starts cooling down in the fall. And if you wait long enough, if the grass ain't growing, don't water it.
Well, not everybody has an in-ground sprinkler system, so what advice do you have for the people out there who are probably watering by hand or moving the sprinkler around their yard?
Now, say don't have the grass blades wet when it turns dark, and sometimes if they don't have an irrigation system, they have to water in the evening. You know, that's fine for the survivability of the lawn. If they can't do it earlier in the day, and just, I guess, do what you can, and don't try to water late at night.
I mean, the difference between hand water and having an automatic system, I think, I personally feel the hand water probably uses less water. He pinpoints the water more to where it's needed at the time, because obviously you just can't just flip a switch. You're out there actually doing it. So I think they're, in a way, actually utilizing the water maybe better.
So for somebody out there who really wants to do their part to conserve but doesn't want to let their yard die, I mean, what are some easy things people can do to conserve?
I'd say a rain sensor on any sprinkler system. I know myself, I forget sometimes to turn it off, and here it rains at 3 in the morning, I don't wake up, and I let it run again. So a rain sensor is a great simple way to stop the water, and it's an easy one for people to do. Another thing is aerating the lawn. That allows the water to get pulled in easier, and you get more effective use out of it just because the ground's not near as compacted.
And explain what that means.
What aeration is basically it just cores little holes in the ground, maybe 6 inches deep, and that loosens the soil up. And so then when the soil's looser, the water can just suck in a lot easier, absorb in easier.
You're going to get a deeper watering, and you're going to maybe get rid of compaction issues. I think we've talked about spots in the yard that just don't seem to grow grass, and it's probably a compacted area. That'll help alleviate some of the compaction.
Is that
Disease
something I could
problems,
figure
too.
out as a fairly new homeowner? Is
Oh,
it pretty
yeah.
easy to do?
Yeah, you can rent one. Most of the garden centers have them, and the larger home improvement stores usually have them too, or you can have a professional come out and do it.
Okay, so what advice do you have for people when they're thinking about setting up their irrigation system for the season?
I think a good rule of thumb is in the springtime, get it turned on, checked out, and then just leave it turned off. And if you see a 2 or 3 day period where the temperatures get up in the 90s, just water it once manually. In June, maybe start looking at it a little bit more, and if we're not getting a lot of rain, set it for 2 days a week, like a Tuesday, Friday, or a Monday, Thursday, something like that. In July, when we're starting to get over 90s consistently and in some hundreds, go to 3 days a week. And if we do get some rain, shut it off. Try to shut it off if it's predicted to rain, and just remember to turn it back on. And in September, when we're starting to cool off again, go back to 2 days a week. And in October, probably turn it off and just water it if you need it. And when that grass quits growing, you really don't need to water it very much. So again, leave it off till June, just water manually. June, 2 days a week. July, August, 3 days a week. September, 2 days a week. October, just leave it manually.
So in no case would you say it needs to run every day, every zone for 20 minutes?
Absolutely not.
So do people who have wells, do they need to think about conserving too?
Irrigation in general, a lot of landscapes, I see more overwatering than I do underwatering, and I think those, not to beat up on those that have their own wells, I think they do water more because they feel like they're getting it for nothing and then that just kind of tempers out to the rest of the people that might be using city water, and they say, well, he's using that much, I can use that much because he's perfectly green. I want to be that green too.
We've had people ask us about the height of your grass. What height should people be mowing their grass to?
One thing I do, and pretty much year round, maybe in the spring, I'll set my mower down a little bit lower, but for the most part all summer long, it's on the tallest, the highest setting my mower will actually go. So it's the highest setting. during the summer months. That's going to give more shade to the crown of that plant. The soil is going to dry out less. The plant doesn't go into as much stress. I think it makes for a healthier lawn, healthier turf.
I mean, typically your warm seasons you mow shorter and again shorter in the early spring and fescues is the same. You mow them always a little bit higher on the cool season grasses, but in the summer I'm like Marty, I raise my deck as high as it'll go. And I don't have an irrigation system, I won't mow until it rains. And then again, you're working with the shading canopy and you're not stressing. When you mow it, you're going to stress that plant, and the plant actually wants to grow more. So by just leaving it alone until we get a rain, and then I'll go in there and mow, the plant is just kind of self-sustaining itself there.
When you say plant, that means yard?
Yard,
Yard,
yes,
okay.
yes, turf. Mm-hmm.
I know we also were talking about conservation tips for plants and shrubs. Will you talk a little bit more about that? And is there a difference in how much water a perennial needs versus an annual? Or it all goes back to the soil?
Getting away from the frequency of watering, and it's watering infrequent and deep. And I kind of rate like you're going to water potted plants, like around your patios. That'll probably be the first thing that needs water. Maybe annuals might be the second thing that needs water. Turf would probably come in third as needing the requirement of water. Perennials, again, depending on perennials. If it's a Rebecca or something that grows in our prairie in Kansas, it could probably go a long time without water. And then trees would probably be the last, with the exception of if you're trying to newly establish, landscape plants or any of those, they may require, a little bit more frequent watering.
Mm-hmm.
There are some great plants, like Tim mentioned, some of our plants that grow in the Flint Hills, which are native, maybe wildflowers, but there's some great liatris, there's butterfly milkweed, there's some plants that are here as native plants that actually will do great in the landscape. So, it kind of depends on what your expectations are on those plants, but also what your expectations are for your turf area as well. I mean, I don't know that we need to have a green lawn or a vibrant green lawn all summer long. I think maybe during the middle of the summer, the heat of the summer, save some water, maybe not look quite as good as it does in the spring and the fall, and I think is maybe good advice.
Yeah, when it's hot like that, I mean, if it's going to stress back a little bit, it will definitely come back in the fall when it cools down. And if it begins to stress, no amount of water is going to bring it back. It's got to take some cool temperatures. So when it does begin to stress, you can keep watering it, but don't increase the amount of water. Leave it like it is. When it gets in the 80s and the 70s, the grass will green back up and be just fine.
And it's going to be a lot less expensive to maybe let that lawn recover, maybe reseed that lawn in the fall, than giving it a lot of water all summer long. Like I say, it's not going to do much good at all.
Right. Yeah, it's a waste.
And let's talk about reseeding and fertilization and all that stuff and what tips you guys have.
Fall is a great time for, and when I say that, it's cool season lawns, fescue lawns. Fall is a great time for overseeding those lawns and for fertilizing of those lawns is also, because those lawns, like we talked about with aeration, they're rebuilding, they're growing at that time, so the grass seeds are going to come up better. At that time, the lawn is going to recover. Trying to do it in the middle of summer is more difficult. Fertilization the same way. Those grasses, those turf areas are hungrier. They're going to use more of the fertilization in the fall, not in the middle of the summer. Now, our warm season lawns, Bermuda grass and zoysia, will need to be or can be fertilized more in the summer and less in the spring and the fall.
Mm-hmm. Growing up, we used to do a lot of heavy fertilization of the cool season lawns in the spring, and basically all you're doing is fertilizing and then mowing and mowing and mowing. Marty, in the fall fertilization, or what they call winterizers a lot of time, which is high nitrogens, is that it goes towards a lot of root development because the plant has started to kind of taper off in its growth cycle and is not going to put on all that green growth. It's going to go, that nitrogen is actually going to be utilized by the roots to develop an extensive root system. So that fall is the great time. And trees are the same way. Trees are going to do a lot more rooting in the fall. They're going to kind of cease in the summer. Fertilization's not going to do a lot of good in that time of year, and the plant's already under stress. Don't fertilize it then. Wait till fall when things are kind of slowing down. The activity above ground that you see is slowing down, but the root activity is just getting ready to take off.
But will it do any damage to your yard if you don't fertilize it for a year so you can save that water?
Well, again, I think it's the placement of when you fertilize. Go towards the fall. It's going to be more utilized by the root system and utilized by the overall plant versus I wouldn't do any in the summer.
Nature will provide us some rain. So fertilizing in the fall, you've got the highest likelihood of getting rains. And also when you overseed, if you overseed in the fall, that grass has a chance to outcompete the weeds. If you overseed in the spring, grass just kind of gets up and going, and then the weeds beat it to death. And you really can't beat it. So in the fall, seed, let the grass get up, get strong, and then it goes dormant, comes up in the spring, and has a chance.
There's also slow release fertilizers that you can utilize. This last 2 summers have been brutal, and I think we're using that as our guide, and that's not our typical guide. I probably wouldn't do any fertilization in the last 2 summers, but in a normal summer, a lot of your grasses may start to look a little pale, or like your Bermudas. You can put a slow release on there that releases that nitrogen very slowly, and then that doesn't stress the plant near as much.
Could you guys explain what it means to let your lawn go dormant, and does that mean that it's dead?
We had a lot across the street from our office. It was a city lot, and fescue was planted there, cool season grass. There was no irrigation at all on that, and that lawn lasted for years. It didn't look real good in the middle of the summer. It went dormant. But in the fall, like we talked earlier, we get cooler weather, we get rains in the fall, and it recovered on its own. No, it didn't look like a football field all summer long, but it looked pretty good, and it survived. Like I said, it went dormant. Didn't grow at all in the summer.
I think that when you talk about dormant, is you're basically just trying to keep the crown of that plant right there at the soil level, just trying to keep it a little bit hydrated so that it doesn't completely dry out. The top that you see above ground will dry out and brown down, but it will come back. That's basically what we're talking about when we're going to put a plant in dormancy. But I also told you that I didn't mow until it rains. That I'm kind of putting that plant in a dormancy also, because it's kind of stopped growing, and then it'll rain and you get some moisture in there, or mow, and it'll come right back.
It is kind of a leap of faith, though,
Yeah.
to say, oh, I'm going to turn off the water, and somehow magically 4 months from now this stuff's going to come back. But my own personal experience, it does. And had I watered it once over the summer last year, it'd have probably done a little better. But I've got a great looking yard that I didn't water for 4 months in the heat of the summer. So it will survive.
Yeah, I don't think we're talking, there's situations that we would completely shut off the water, but there's also situations that will hydrate a little bit to keep the crown alive. So you can still utilize some irrigation during the heat. It'll be a lot less frequent than what people are typically doing now.
Not every day.
Not
for
every
20
day
minutes.
for 20
Maybe
minutes.
once every 2 weeks.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
you're not going to see any difference in the grass. It's going to look dead, but it will make a difference when it comes to greening back up in the fall. And it may not green up till October, but it will start greening back up. It is a leap of faith, though.
That might be a good point when we're talking about cool seasons a little bit, is when should we plant those for most efficient water use, and that would be fall. Get them started in the fall, overseed in the fall, or get new lawns started in the fall. Not that you can't do it in the spring, but you're going to utilize a lot less water by reestablishing or putting in a new lawn in the fall when it comes to the fescues.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Let's talk about xeriscape. Did I say that right?
It's actually xeriscape.
Okay.
But and I think Marty talked about it a little bit earlier, but many people think xeriscape is no water. I don't look at it that way. I look at it as maybe a better utilization of the water using drip irrigation. It is utilizing a lot of plants that are more drought tolerant, but I don't think it's zero water use. It's maybe low water use. Or again, if you've got something that you want to grow, like I'll throw out rhododendrons and azaleas that might have high water requirements or high shading requirements. Maybe you put those just in a certain area and you just water that area, and you let the rest of the landscape be more of a xeric landscape.
And have maybe 2 or 3 of those plants that require more water, but the rest of it would require less.
And you're just watering that area that requires a little bit more water. Marty, you mentioned earlier a turf area, maybe cutting down the turf area a little bit, or better utilizing a turf area of maybe a patch of fescue, which should be highly maintained in a front yard, changing the backyard to a Bermuda.
So if people have questions or want more information, where are some places they can go to get that?
the Kansas State University website is a wealth of information on plant selection, maintaining turf. I would direct them there first, or the Sedgwick County Extension Service as well.
Right, both have a website, K-State, it's just ksre.ksu.edu, or the Sedgwick County Extension has the sites. And I even just typed in drought tolerant trees, and I think the first 4 or 5 sites that came up were Kansas related, actually publications. And K-State will have a number of publications available out at the Extension office.
Now, would that also cover irrigation stuff, or do you have another recommendation?
The good website is irrigation.org. Put that in, and they've got a wealth of things on how to water your yard, what time of day to water, all that good stuff.
How long to let your irrigation system run?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Well, you guys, thank you so much for being here. You've been a tremendous help to us, and we really appreciate being able to pick your brains for a little bit.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching this edition of Local Loop.